Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. I'm Mike Montague, and today we want to talk about seniors, living seniors, housing, how our housing needs change as we age. The reality is we've got a baby boomer generation out there that is entering into their 60s and their 70s. The need for seniors housing and long-term care has been increasing. We can't get away from the fact that within the last year with the pandemic, it's created a lot of crisis situations in long-term care facilities. And I want to talk a little bit about that without pointing fingers or anything, because I think it's going to be a long time for us to assess the reality of why certain things happen within homes. But it certainly needs to be addressed that there are issues that exist within long-term care, and our government has been playing catch up for an awful long time. And I think they've actually been losing pace in what we need to be doing. And Arif, I know you and I both have parents who are in that age range who are dealing with the long-term care systems and that. So I think I wouldn't call us authorities, but we certainly have experience as children of aging parents within the industry there. Any thoughts do you have leading off here, Arif?
Wow. I mean, you gave us a lot to work with there, Mike, and certainly as I'm listening to you share and try to maintain perspective, if you will, as loose and free perspective as you can, a whole host of emotions go through my mind. Some of them are certainly emotional reactions and responses to what you're talking about. Others are more along the lines of practical, and I'm trying to maintain that sort of wider, less personally in tuned perspective, if you will, more of a general one to recognize what happens in a year from now or 2 years from now when this is over. And for every response that we're seeing right now between government or entity versus the human element and the individualized response, whether it's satisfaction or a lack of satisfaction to what we've seen over the last, certainly the last year. Again, the question then becomes, well, what next? How do we pivot? How do we respond? And will our responses be short-term, and when things may never go back to normal, but when we get into this groove and when we realize we're 6 months into this new version of what we're doing based on our responses, but we then realize, well, what is the cost and how has that impacted our lifestyles? And were we truly prepared to make this sudden hard shift in one direction? So yeah, Mike, I mean, I got a lot of things that I think we could talk about on the show, and I don't want to go into any one of them too deep, just in my initial response to you.
Well, we can certainly touch on them though, and again, there more and more people are in need of long-term care, and then there's also something we've talked about on this show is people choosing to age in place. It's not always an option. I think income levels determine what your options and the quality of your options are as seniors. The reality being, I can speak personally with my father, who is now in long-term care. We had him here at the house for a couple of years as, he started to go through dementia. And it hits a point where somebody has to be home with that person all the time for their care and safety. And the reality of these days is most households are two-income households. And for one person to step away to care for someone, it's not always an option financially, as much as emotionally you want to be there for that person. So we are always going to need that support system out there. The long-term care system needs to be in place. But I think what we learned is we've been saying for some time that they're underfunded, they're understaffed, there are challenges within the system, and it took something like a pandemic to happen for that to really ring, unfortunately and sadly, as loudly as it has. So in terms of going back to where we were, I hope we are more on the ball than that we would allow the things to happen again that brought us to where we are to happen once more. I hope this is a shift and a transition of the system. Doesn't mean long-term care is going to be more expensive. It will on the whole, if we're going to require, increasing staff and increasing the level of service and safety within the homes. But who's going to foot the bill for that? Is it the government as a whole, all of us collectively, or are individuals, families going to have to pay more to have a family member go into long-term care? These are things we'll see that'll unfold over time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Again, I know you've been thinking about this for a while, and a whole lot of thought gone into it. And
well, it's near and dear, so.
Absolutely. And similarly, I mean, I've got a father who is now in long-term care. He spent a fair amount of time actually in a hospital environment because there was not a suitable bed for him, a suitable place for him in long-term care. And the reality is that my mother did her very best to try and keep him in his home that he had, if you will, spent half a century basically building his lifestyle. And at some point, it actually went beyond simple economics or affordability, as you mentioned. It went into the fact that he required care that was beyond what a basic caregiver, if you could, if you will, could provide, and take things into consideration. We have to go and look at why long-term care facilities, or why retirement facilities, or why nursing homes exist. And they exist for a few reasons. One, though, is about economics. It is economies of scale. It is the simple fact that to have a PSW who I don't know, I'm not going to attempt to speak out of turn, but I know the rates can range anywhere between $17 an hour and maybe $20, $21 an hour. And I don't know, I might be wrong on that, but those whom I've spoken with, that's sort of where they're earning.
For in-house care is what you're speaking of.
And you take that person and you put them into you need around the clock. Some people need around the clock care. So that's 168 hours a week. That's 24 hours a day care. You're upwards of $100,000 a year. You're not just looking at a single person at 40,000. For the average household, even on dual income revenue coming into the home, that's just not attainable. Mike, we got to go to break, but when we come back from break, let's actually pick this up and find out how we got to where we are and how could we just pivot without, if one thing changes, everything needs to change. And really, how can we break that down? But we got to go to break. Stick with us at Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
When I felt hopeless, United Way had my back. In the summer of 2015, I lived only to feed my addictions. I had lost my friends, family, and business, and was homeless and broke. I attempted suicide again. In the hospital, I faced more rehab and counseling, but had no hope. A referral to a walk-in counseling clinic funded by United Way made all the difference. In the sessions that followed, I discovered that childhood sexual assault was at the core of my struggles. I still have work to do, but I'm feeling happy and hopeful. I can't ever remember feeling like that. My name's Jeff, and donations to United Way Simcoe Muskoka helped change my life. Thank you.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. And this week, Mike and I are discussing something that is certainly front and center on people's minds, and that is those who are nearest and dearest to us, our loved ones, our seniors, those who may be living in assisted living conditions, or considering or reconsidering or what to do. given our certainly our reality. And this is not a brand new discussion. This is a discussion that's been going on for decades, if not generations. And Mike, you touched on the fact that obviously you have baby boomers, you have more and more people who are going to require some form of assistance with living as we enter into the golden years as we know them. And really, obviously, it's a hot topic, and our goal is not to assess anything that is well beyond our pay grade and certainly beyond merely our own opinions and perspectives, but more to look at the conversation in general. And before we went to the break, you know, I just actually, when we did go to the break, I did some simple math based on 160 hours, 68 hours a week, based on $20 an hour, hoping that that is what an in-home caregiver or caregiver would be receiving. And that's just shy of $175,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's the cost for the human resource, lack of saying it any differently, alone, not including any special assistive devices or anything like that. So for the average household, even a 2-income household, that's just not feasible. Let's be blunt. So
as costly as it seems to have someone go into extended care, long-term care, when you break it down, it's actually a bargain when you look at the alternative of trying to do provide all of those services from within the home. So. Sure.
So I can imagine that there's obviously the mental battle that goes on between loved ones, between siblings, between married couples. Is the current situation that we're dealing with. It's to some it's unconscionable. How can we leave mom, dad? How can we leave our loved one in this type of an environment? Yeah. And so we feel compelled to take them out. The reality is when that sort of initial shock wears off, and I think that's what a lot of people will go into reasonably. You suffer trauma, mental, emotional trauma, you're in shock. And when that wears off, you realize, well, that's quite possibly not sustainable, not manageable to have mom or dad in the house.
Yeah, and that's I just want to jump in on that because I'm sure there's a lot of families can identify with this who have been through it. And those who are once or twice removed from it, family members or friends who see you in your situation of, making that transition to put someone into long-term care, they may see that as a self-serving behavior on your part when it really isn't. If you're removed from it, you don't understand it to the same degree as when you're living it day in, day out. It's not a selfish thing. We did this for my dad, and we were riddled with guilt, and we were reminded from people outside that what we were doing was inconsiderate. They didn't understand what we were doing was out of fear and an abundance of caution and concern for our parents' situation now and where they were going. So.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, at some point, yes, there's you use the words guilt, use the words inconsiderate, actually. However, if you actually are able to step back and realize, well, wait a second, I'm mentally and emotionally drained. I'm exhausted. I can't go to my job. I can't take care of my own kids and give my mom or dad the best care that he or she deserves, other than keeping them in front of a TV. It actually ends up being, and I'm going to be very careful, but it's almost equally inconsiderate to not put them in a facility where they will be able to get someone who is not exhausted, who is better equipped and better trained to give them the care that they
therapists, professionals who are going to stimulate them and help them with the activities.
That's a no-win conversation. Let's be honest. It is a no-win conversation. But let's go back into this. I mean, you talked earlier in the first segment about people. There is a trend towards, and there likely will be a spike or a surge in applications to do second suites within the home. And that second suite, we talk about aging in place. Well, yes, you're right. I mean, not so long ago, the mortality, average age of mortality might have been in its late 30s, 40s, 50s, somewhere in there. We're now well into the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. For an average lifespan. With medicine, with better nutrition, with better knowledge, we are living longer and potentially healthier. So the question is that cycle, the normal cycle of living in a neighborhood or going through the school system into the workforce, into rental versus home ownership, and the cycle of life. We have some constants and we have some variables, and the variables are we are living we are living longer, but our resources are not necessarily keeping up.
Yeah, and what I have seen in terms of alternatives, and we won't delve into them in any great detail on how, rather than at least acknowledging them. And one of the first ones is creating that second suite within a house where either a parent can live or a care worker can live within the household of that senior in their own home. So you got the blended family scenario in a second suite situation. You have that senior aging in place in their own home. But there's another scenario that it's becoming a little more popular over time, and that is a group of seniors selling their existing homes, buying a larger home together, like the Golden Girls, like the TV show, where you have 3, 4, or 5 seniors living together within one home that they own collectively or lease, however they're managing it, and then collectively paying for services to come in. So there's the economies of scale there. That's one other option that's out there. And then the third option for most and unavoidable for many is going into long-term care.
Yep, Mike, I think here's the thing. We talked about it actually about 2 years ago on our show. We had a guest in, and we did talk about this collective living where there was a group of, the ideal was that a group of 5 or 6 seniors are sharing the cost under tenants in common and bringing in or sharing the cost of bringing in some care to the home. And I think we will see more of that. I do believe that trend will continue to inch up. I don't know if it'll take the world by storm overnight, but I do think it will become more popular. My challenge, honestly, is that I think that the rest of the world is going to have to come on board with that idea.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, that's the lending institutions. They have been gun shy to that for sure.
For sure.
No, there isn't a financial institution that wants to be known for evicting seniors. And I understand that that's why they've not had the world's greatest appetite towards that. But as with many things, including wet signatures and how we deal in transactions during a pandemic, not being able to be face-to-face, I think this is one of the things that will force some change within the financial world. We do have to go to break, Mike. When we come back, let's talk more about these solutions. And let's also talk about the fact of, well, count to 10, what happens when the world goes back to some form of normal? Are we going to keep this or are we not? But stick with us. We'll be right back after this short break on Rogers TV Barrie, back on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif.
Ready to move forward financially? Then you won't want to miss Money Matters with Doug Jones here on Rogers TV. It's a personal finance show focused on getting you expert advice in all matters related to.
Hey, did you know?
More than 4,500 Canadians are waiting for an organ transplant right now.
Right now. 4,500.
People are dying.
And you could save a life. 90% of Canadians say they're willing to donate their organs.
But only a few are registered.
So what are you waiting for? Get registered.
It's easy and it's free.
Leave a legacy. Be a hero.
Save a life.
Find out how to register today. Go to kidney.ca.
With NHL Center Ice, you get a premium ticket to the games you want every night of the season. Catch every key out-of-market matchup each week. You'll get more goals, more saves, more non-stop action from the teams you love. NHL Center Ice, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Order through your remote on Channel 450 or call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're talking about seniors living. We're talking about. Ready? Roll.
Go.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And we've been talking about seniors living and the changes, the shift that happens in families and in people's lives when we need to change our living situation, going into assisted living or into seniors living. And that's something I want to touch on right off the bat. And I'll put it over to you, Arif. Identify the differences, because I haven't always known the difference between assisted living versus seniors living. They're two very different yet similar products
and services. You're right, Mike. And as you mentioned, I think quite rightly so, until it impacts your life directly or indirectly through someone in your family, you may not understand, or I certainly didn't know all of the differences. And I think I've heard it best summed up simply as independent living or assisted living. That could be nursing care or retirement care. It could include adult lifestyle community. It can include a retirement home in the sense that we understand it to be. The fact of the matter is, though, Mike, you're absolutely right. First and foremost, you cannot just suddenly, I don't think anyway, you can just suddenly throw at everything we think we know and all of the evolution, good, bad, or otherwise, all of the progress, good, bad, or otherwise, that we've made as society, where we've gone from single income families to dual income or multi-income families, where we've gone from having our multiple generations living under one roof. And in some cultures, in some communities, you do still see that, certainly in other places around the world, but certainly even in Ontario and in Canada.
Some more than others, for sure.
Some more than others, absolutely. But that's been a slow to a reality progress or progression. And because of what we're dealing with today, I think it's a very interesting concept that some people are just saying, that's it, that's all, throwing it all out, we're going to go do it, without realizing that there is a ripple effect. There are so many things going on. The biggest challenge that I think we're seeing, though, right now, the hurt or the concern or the guilt within some families may be around the concept that it's been within not only vulnerable people who are immunocompromised or maybe suffering from other ailments that are contributing to untimely death and demise, but it's also the element of congregant living. And I know that a recent article really kind of touched a nerve with you around congregate living and where finger pointing happened. And Mike, maybe you want to share on that for a second, but I recognize that this is really sensitive, and I really want to talk to you before we lose the show about what comes next.
Yeah, well, I think when something as traumatic and tragic as what we've been seeing with the pandemic and how it is impacted, especially right here locally, just a couple blocks from my house, there's a facility where the losses are just hard to grasp, is a reality. And my heart goes out to all the families who are dealing with that scenario and with that situation.
Yeah, Mike, I know that this is something that has been really plaguing your mind, and it was around the assumption that somebody was to blame for allowing seniors to wander.
Well, that's what was going to be my point, is because it's such an emotionally challenging thing, the instinct is you want to find out why, who to blame. The reality, as we touched on briefly earlier, is this has been a long-term problem for quite some time that goes over many different government leaderships, both provincially and federally. The reality is we've coasted, and that can's been kicked down the road, and nothing significant has been done that would prepare us for a scenario like we've seen unfold in the last year and a half. So it's been a wake-up call.
I'm going to challenge. I'm going to challenge that, though, and I'm going to put some of that on the people, right? Because I mean, it is always more convenient to assign blame. And listen, this is not what I want this show to get into. But I would argue that if something was so absolutely core and challenging to our core principles and such a priority to us, we as the electorate, we as the people would make it the priority. We would march on Capitol Hill. We would march on Queen's Park. We would make our leaders listen. The challenge is, though, I think
that voice has been there.
I think for many, it's a big deal, but you know, I got to think about how would this impact my life otherwise. And that's a very big reality. And that's not being dismissive of it. That's a huge reality. Am I willing to adjust my personal life? Here's the question. All right. Because for many of us who feel compelled that we should say, you know what, I'm going to do whatever I can to bring my loved one back home.
Mm-hmm.
In 6 months from now, if you last that long, and I think for many of us, no, I mean, God, it's not a lack of love, and it's not a lack of caring.
No,
it will be exhausting financially. It will be exhausting mentally. It will be exhausting emotionally. And so the question is, when this eventually does subside to a certain degree, because it will, and they always do, what are we going to be left with? What actually will change? Which of our habits that we adapted or adopted over the last year will stay, and which ones will be like, oh, thank God I'm out of here. I'm going to go on with my life and go back and travel, and I'm not wearing a mask, or I'm not doing something. So that's a real test, because we actually see people leaving in record numbers, literally record numbers, leaving the GTA for areas like Simcoe County, Barrie, Milton, other areas. We're literally selling our homes, getting out.
A lot of retired people.
How much of that is going to stay versus how much of that is going to eventually, go back to the way it was before? You say you take all the wealth in the world and you disperse it evenly, the same people will have all the wealth back within 10 years. Well, what about these types of habits? Will people move back to the GTA? Will people decide that they want to, go back to the life, certainly as much as they can, to the way it used to be?
Yeah, big questions. And certainly the COVID-19 has raised new questions, but it also has taken situations and questions that have always been there and cast a big bright spotlight on them. And certainly seniors living, be it long-term care or just seniors lifestyle living, there have been challenges, there have been concerns with regards to cost and to the level of service provided, safety, all of these things. Some people have raised their voices, but all of us collectively have not to any degree that's going to create substantial change. But I think if anything comes out of this, we realize now that we haven't been loud enough, that we haven't been paying as much attention. So that's a lesson there. I don't think it's as much a blame of anything, because
I think, Mike, I think
it maybe is a testament to the fact that it's been good enough that nobody's really had to complain too loudly up until now. But we realize,
I think you put a great bow on it there, and we got to go. Yeah. We're out of time, but I think that is a great way of summarizing it. And no doubt we'll be having this discussion further. I want to thank everybody for watching. Mike, thanks for putting something on your sleeve here a little bit. Not an easy one, but I think it's one that was worth talking about. We will see you again next time on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV. Barrie, take care.